It's the Believe in Texans podcast brought to you by FanDuel. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can see that I'm not in my normal location. We've got a whole lot of restructuring and reorganization going around at our studio here at Sports Radio 610. So that's where I am. But at least you'll always know exactly what time it is as I'm recording this. And I'm going to do it in a few chunks today, okay? So I'm not trying to pull any conspiracy theory on you, pulling the wool over your eyes. The time's going to change from the first to the second to the third segment. Few things. One, the breaking news this weekend was that EJ Speed tore his quadriceps tendon and or muscle. And according to Aaron Wilson, he's going to be out for probably at least 5 months. So that puts him June, July, August, September, October or so. And they'll have to make up for it somehow. And we'll get into that. We'll discuss exactly who the replacements are, whether they're on the team right now or not. Texans signed one guy that we'll get to. I also want to talk about some of the free agents that are still out there and potential trade targets, because that might factor into a possible replacement for EJ Speed. And then we'll get into a few of the other fringe things that are happening on the roster. Aaron Wilson reported previously, but also talked about it again, the fact that Cade Stover might be spending more time at fullback, and a couple of little hanging concerns that I have about where the Texans defense can improve even more, and it has to do with scrambling quarterbacks. But if we look at the linebackers, and by the way, I was just digging around on FanDuel, and the odds for NFL MVP, not defensive MVP. Will Anderson has the best odds of defensive players to win the NFL MVP. It's at plus 30,000, so basically 300 to 1. And I found it notable that Deshaun Watson is listed right next to him at plus 30,000, which feels degrading. But look, we know the situation with Deshaun. He's actually got to stay healthy and be out there. But the Texans might see Deshaun Watson this year when the Texans play the Browns. So the EJ Speed injury. This is probably a bigger deal than you might think, because you didn't think of him as a full-time starter. He did start 9 games for the Texans this year and played about 45% of the defensive snaps. The thing that was really nice about EJ this year, and what made the defense better in 25 than they were in 2024, was that they were able to play their base 4-3 when they needed to. The previous year, I felt like there were times when they're out there in nickel, which is 4 defensive linemen, 2 linebackers, and 5 defensive backs. A lot of times where I think DeMeco ideally would have been like to have been in their base 4-3, and they just didn't have the guys to do it. Last year with EJ Speed out there, you could have Azeez, you could have Toa, you could have EJ out there all at the same time. When Azeez got injured, EJ Speed was able to step in and start next to Toa. So you lose that. And when we look at the current roster, the Texans signed, I keep wanting to say Casey Concepcion. Casey, I'm going to get it. No, but I'm not even going to pause. Casey Ossai. Thank you. Casey Ossai, who Nick was really high on during training camp last year as an undrafted rookie free agent. We had asked him during one of our interviews with him on Sports Radio 610 who a couple of his favorite UDFAs were, and he mentioned Jackson Woodard and Casey Ossai, brother of Joseph Ossai. But Casey Ossai said he was just there all the time, him and Woodard working out together, getting extra time in. And so he comes back into the fold after spending the year on the practice squad, I believe, in Miami last year. So he'll be one to watch. I think that when it comes to actual pop, like guys that I see when they're playing linebacker and they move around really well, they might be undersized, but I'd put them into the category of special teams dudes, are Jake Hansen, who we've seen, we played a lot in that Packers game last year, and he's filled in at times, a little bit undersized. He's always listed at 230, but I feel like that's a bit ambitious. I don't know. Maybe it's because he moves around real fast, doesn't stack and shed. He jumps around blocks, but that's the type of body type that he is. He has to do that. You know who else jumped around blocks? Didn't like to take on blocks? Ray Lewis. He did all right. There's a little bit of a difference. We could go through and find some other differences between Jake Hansen and Ray Lewis, but it's not the end of the world in the modern NFL if you're not a guy that takes on blocks, that stacks and sheds and does all of that. But the other special teams guys, one of these guys we probably haven't talked about enough, but the Jake Hummel. Jake Hummel is the guy they picked up in March who had been with Baltimore and is a special teams demon. But I like the way he moves. I think he plays with a certain ferocity, and he's got more experience than Jamal Hill. But with Jake Hansen being the other special teams guy, if you look at Jake Hansen and Jake Hummel, last year Jake Hansen took 9 snaps on defense. Jake Hummel took over 100 snaps on defense playing for the Ravens. Jamal Hill, who also played predominantly on special teams, but you look at him as a guy that's got upside. He ended up playing 8 snaps on defense and showed some physicality, not quite the same athleticism and pop as those other guys we've already talked about. And the other guy that's probably been under-discussed is Marte Mapu. Remember the Texans traded for him with New England earlier this year. And Mapu's one of these guys that in New England, just judging by what their fan base said and what you see on film, played safety at times, played linebacker. I think he looks a little bit like a larger version of Jalen Petrie. If you have to think of Jalen Petrie as, hey, he's like a defensive back who can play linebacker, I think Mapu looks like a linebacker who can play safety, if that makes sense. He's very athletic, comes up, makes some plays, but never really worked his way into a big role on defense with the Patriots. I hesitate to call the Texans' ability to develop linebackers similar to what the Astros were with their pitchers back in the day, but I think there is a little bit of that. I think between the defensive tackles and the linebackers, DeMeco and his staff just seem to have a knack for getting the best out of those guys. If we go outside the building, the guy that intrigues me right now, just because I've seen him on a couple of potential trade lists, is Blake Cashman. Remember Blake? He was here in 2023, went off to Minnesota, reportedly didn't play as well this year as he had the previous year in Minnesota, but who knows whether there are injuries or just whatever else in play there. I think that DeMeco and Nick like Blake Cashman a lot, so we could potentially see reuniting with them. But I think it's most likely that right now it's May. They want to see what they have with Jamal Hill. They want to see. Obviously, I've neglected the rookies and Aidan Fisher. I think any one of those guys that I just mentioned is a candidate to potentially be that third linebacker. And if you put them through the gauntlet of all that competition at training camp, one or two of those guys might emerge, and they'll, between the special teamers and the rookies and anybody else that might be in the fold between now and then, I think the most likely scenario is that it ends up being somebody in-house. I don't think they need to spend extra resources to replace a guy in EJ Speed that hopefully will be back in October. And the other part of it, I think, is just that they can theoretically maybe go back to a little bit of what they did in 2024, which is play more nickel in situations where you might be playing base. One of you guys on my live stream this weekend made a great point, which is, hey, if Cade McDonald ends up being the guy they hope he is in terms of being able to stop the run when you need to stop the run, that also allows you to sometimes line up in nickel where you want to stop the run, but you want Jalen Petrie in there and everything that comes with that. That if Caden McDonald can really soak up blocks and really be a presence in the middle, it frees you up to do a lot more of that. This Texans roster, which had seemed so complete, so thoroughly competitive throughout, at least when it comes to the starting positions, looks a little less complete right now, even though EJ Speed's not a full-time starter. We've discussed all of that. The Texans are still plus 2,000 to win the Super Bowl on FanDuel. Did not expect the EJ Speed news to affect that at all. But are there still opportunities or places where they might want to bring somebody from the outside in? And there's still some notable free agents available. And I thought this was interesting. ESPN put out their top 14 ranked free agents, and some of these names are enticing and intriguing. Some of these guys are just maybe kind of sitting and waiting to see if either A, the right contract comes along, or B, somebody gets injured during training camp. And two guys who aren't on this list are Derek Barnett and DeMeco Ryans. I don't know if DeMeco Ryans is going to play football this year. I would be very interested in having Derek Barnett come back, but I think Derek Barnett might be looking for that opportunity to be a full-time starter somewhere. Probably the last few years that he might have that opportunity. So I get it. As much as he did great things for the Texans, and it's probably fun playing on a defense like that, a lot of guys want to be the starter. And that's where, when we get into some of the edge rushers that are available, I wonder how much of that dynamic is going to play in with a guy like Joey Bosa. So I would love having Joey Bosa on this team. He's been healthy the last couple of years. It looked like at a point there, it looked like he was starting to get old and was banged up all the time. But I think he philosophically fits into this scheme really well. They operate in with a lot of the same dynamics up in Buffalo that they do here. But I just don't know if I want to spend that kind of money that he might be looking for. And I think the timing might not just work out. So that's something to watch for maybe on during training camp. The other guy that might be more realistic, but again, might be looking to go to a place where he's got a chance to be a starter, because none of these defensive ends are going to have a chance to be a starter unless Danielle Hunter or Will Anderson gets injured, is AJ Epinesa, the edge rusher. Remember, first rounder from a few years back, and first rounder or high second round, whatever he was. That he's intriguing because a lot of times what they want is just, they want somebody that's not going to replace the same pass rush as obviously Will Anderson or Danielle Hunter, but you want to get a guy that's going to be willing to really anchor down versus the run. And I think that the Texans are better off at backup defensive end than I think sometimes I let on, and I feel bad about it, because I think Dylan Horton right now, the way he played last year, is a very serviceable backup, and there's still upside. Remember, he's still recovering from cancer treatment, beating cancer a couple of years back. And I know it seems like, well, yeah, shouldn't he be fine by now? Look, we've had a lot of experience with that, unfortunately, in Houston, with guys that have come back from cancer, and they seem to all say that it's really 2 or 3 years before they really start to feel like themselves. Getting over the treatment, and however aggressive they were with it, tends to be way more taxing than maybe sometimes it's easy to play off. Solomon Byrd, I'm intrigued by as well. And then Logan Hall can play defensive end, especially in run situations. That's a guy that, DeMeco had said they're going to start him off on the inside. And I think that's where they want him to get comfortable and play defensive tackle, because he's one of 4 starting caliber defensive linemen they have on the D line at defensive tackle right now. They've got at least 4 starting caliber if Cade McDonald plays up to where I think he could play. The other interesting edge guy is Cameron Jordan. Again, I think he would have a lot of the versatility that they might be looking for. He's going to be 30. He's at least 35. They don't list his age on here. He's old, but the Texans love having old defensive linemen in there. They love having old heads in the room that can dispense their wisdom to the younger guys. And maybe the young guys like Will Anderson ain't so young no more, and Will Anderson is coming to his own. Still soaks up all the tutelage from Danielle Hunter and whatnot. But Cade McDonald is that young guy now. So Cameron Jordan, the thing that intrigues me about him is just that, man, he's been in a rough situation in New Orleans for a few years now, but he's also tasted being on a good football team. And he might just be ready for, man, I want to go somewhere where, okay, cool. The retirement plan that's best for defensive linemen, like the dream job, is to spend your last 5 years playing 20 snaps a game situationally. And it's awesome. I never got to that point because I just started getting injured too much in my later years. But my rookie year, I was on a team with Clyde Simmons. Remember Clyde from back in the old Eagles days when they were really terrifying? And that's what he did. He was specifically limited to like 20 or fewer snaps per game. Wanted to play more, they wouldn't let him, and that's how you get put out to pasture. But if it's on a good football team, it's a whole lot of fun. It's like when a racehorse becomes somebody that just the people rent them to put their kids on and ride around on the beach and whatnot. And then the other Von Miller, I think not necessarily exactly what the Texans might be looking for, because they have the guy that they need to come in and play on 3rd and long. And I'm not sure it's exactly the right scheme fit. but the Jadeveon Clowney too. Jadeveon Clowney can fit into any scheme. He's played in 3-4s, he's played in 4-3s. I think the thing about Clowney that seemed to be a hang up with him and Bill O'Brien was always that he might not prefer to practice as much or as aggressively as maybe Bill O'Brien wanted. The difference with him now, at least that's what people speculated. The difference with him now is that he's a bona fide guy well into his 30s. That's what you do with those guys anyway. He plays his butt off on Sundays. I mean, he's got a really good motor. People sometimes, I think, they took those Steve Spurrier comments from when he was in college and ran with him about how he wasn't as good as the great running back from South Carolina there in terms of work ethic and everything. But I'd be intrigued, but I don't think it's necessarily what the Texans are looking for right now. He played well with Dallas last year. The other guys on here that I don't think the Texans will dip their toe into the water with, but I wouldn't be incredibly surprised if there were injuries. Could we see a Stephon Diggs? I don't think so. Let me know in the comments, do you want to see a Stephon Diggs? He was very good for the Patriots last year. He was acquitted of the charges against him in 2.5 hours because the case that was brought up against him, just by my amateur legal eye, just didn't. It looked like one of these cases where you're like, why is the DA even deciding to prosecute this? So he was found not guilty on those charges. If you hadn't heard that update or you're wondering or worrying about that. But I think right now, especially where Diggs is really transitioned into being a slot receiver, is that the Texans just have too competitive a situation right there at slot receiver, where we all want to see more of Jalen Noel, right? Tank Dell is not a slot. I know he's tiny, so people tend to think he's a slot. He'll spend some time down there, but I don't classify him as a slot receiver. He takes the vast majority of his snaps outside. Maybe that might change depending on how he is athletically when he comes back, but as a smaller guy like that too, I don't necessarily want to see him taking all the abuse that slot receivers do. But they drafted Lewis Bond and the kid from Syracuse, or not obviously Lewis Bond is the kid from Syracuse. Oh yeah, Daniel Sobkowitz. Daniel Sobkowitz is the really intriguing guy out of Illinois State, who was just super productive in college, averaged over 1,000 yards per season over the last 3 seasons, set the receptions record and probably a touchdown record at Illinois State. But it's an FCS school, and how does he adjust to the NFL? I don't know, but I think they want to see. I would not expect him to be obviously the same guy as Stephon Diggs, but I think there's a lot of competition there. And you already have, depending on how Tank Dell looks and feels and everything else, hopefully a crowded receiver room. If it turns into a crowded receiver room because Tank Dell is healthy, that's a good problem to have. Rounding out the rest of the guys, Kevin Zeitler, guard. Nope, we've got too many of them already. Super competition in the interior offensive line for the first time in a long time. Deebo Samuel, he's not who you think he is and hasn't been for a few years now. Well, you know what? No, I don't want to. It's not like I'm trying to throw shade at Deebo Samuel or anything, but the crowded receiver room dynamic is still in play there. With injuries, possibly. Taylor Decker, offensive tackle. We're good with offensive tackle. Jonnu Smith would be somebody I might be interested in if, because he's a guy that can move around all over the place and flex outside, play in line, do all of these. You can do what you need him to do. But I feel like that's a really competitive situation for your top 3 guys right now. And Marlon Klein, I'm guessing they're hoping to use him. I mean, you don't draft him there if you don't think that there's a chance that he could play in his rookie year. You've got Moreau as a blocking tight end, and then you've got Brevin Jordan and Cade Stover, who we'll get to playing fullback in a little bit. Bobby Wagner, I think they might be really intrigued by him. Even though he's well up there in years, he continues to play good football. Mekhi Becton, no, I told you already. We're good. We're good with interior offensive linemen. Who's on this list? Other than Trayvon Diggs, who the Texans don't need to be shopping in that aisle just yet for any reason. Nick Chubb Nick Chubb's on this list of best available free agents, and I'm really happy that he was able to go out there and be productive for the Texans last year. But I think we've probably seen enough of Nick Chubb. I think when it comes to potential trade targets, that's what I'm really interested in when it comes to running backs, because there's a few names out there of guys that, okay, with running backs, you don't want to fall in love with the name, obviously, because running backs do not tend to age all that well. But James Conner from the Cardinals he's old. He's going to be 31. He's coming off of an injury, but was having a really good year last year before he got injured. And if he's a guy that's going to come in and understand that he's 32 years old and there might not be a boatload of carries, and the Cardinals wanted to trade for James Conner, we might have to see how it looks during training camp. And I'm intrigued by Jawar Jordan. He always looks great during camp, but he's a small guy. And I think even if Jawar Jordan ends up doing some good things for the Texans this year, I think you need a little bit more of an all-purpose back if you really want to feel like, oh, okay, we've got a better option than Agumbawale this year, or Dameon Pierce after he had fallen off. The Noah Whittington kid out of Oregon is really intriguing. And then British Brooks, obviously, is also very intriguing. But I don't know if you could call him an all-purpose back or a guy that you would want to go in there and have to give you 20 snaps if that's what or 20 carries if all of a sudden everybody ended up injured. And then if we move back to the tight ends a little bit, Cade Stover, as Aaron Wilson has reported a couple of times, is, I guess, planning on him working at fullback more this year. And he's been always one of these guys I think they look at as a potential H-back type of guy that can play tight end in line, maybe can do some things as a receiver, but also maybe you pull the old James Casey with him and he ends up playing fullback a lot. Even if you don't call him a fullback on the roster, he ends up being your quasi-fullback. I'm a little let down by this if it means that they're moving off of British Brooks as a fullback, just because he has a sturdiness and an appetite for violence that I find very, very intriguing. So, and it's just a great name. It's alliteration. It's British Brooks, which is an awesome name for a bruising fullback to have. But Cade Stover is a pretty badass name too, Stover. So I have to fight against the prejudice I have as a guy who was raised up in the NFL back when the fullback was still very much a thing. Back in the day, kids, they use a numbering system for all the personnel groupings now. So 21 personnel, that means there's 2 running backs and 1 tight end. That used to be called regular. We would call that regular because that was the regular formation you expected to see. They got a fullback, they got a tight end. We eat meat and potatoes for dinner, and we do not do cardio, and dad smokes Marlboros. Okay. That's the America I grew up in. And now everybody's into fitness and nobody smokes and nobody has a fullback. Well, but it's starting to swing back that way. I like that. I love having a fullback. In the modern NFL, it's awesome to have a fullback, but he's also got to be a receiving threat. So that's where Cade Stover comes in. I think he has the potential to do it. At some point, you got to see it in action, and his injuries have slowed him down in these last couple of years. He was late to the position, didn't play tight end until his last couple of years in college after he transitioned from linebacker at Ohio State. But I do think sometimes, who was I? I was talking with one of my old teammates about this. I think sometimes people underestimate just how difficult it is to play fullback. There's a whole lot of anticipation that goes into it in reading defenses and figuring out whether a linebacker is going to scrape over the top, not to mention the actual technique of blocking. So to think, oh, okay, well, yeah, that's a big, strong guy. Let's just have him play fullback. Oh, yeah, and by the way, it's a lot harder when you're 6'4" than when you're than when you're like classic fullback size, because you got to get down and up underneath linebackers who are flying at you. But I'm intrigued with the experiment. I just think that people look at fullback almost as if we've got one, then we'll use one, but we're not gonna necessarily go out and draft one or sign one in free agency. Although the Giants did bring Ricard, their fullback. John Harbaugh brought him from the Ravens up to New York. So they've got respect for the fullback position. Texans play the Giants this year. I did a Jackson Dart video on my live stream, and for some reason somebody was upset with me because I wasn't doing Texans content, and I don't understand what the point was. The Texans play the Giants this year. I don't. Do some people think that you just show up and play opponents without thinking about them beforehand? It's like that's like the football nightmare where you show up and you forgot your uniform. If you didn't do deep dives into all of your opponents. Jackson Dart, by the way, the one conclusion I came to is after talking almost just defiantly about how he wasn't going to change his running style last year. It seems between the combination of John Harbaugh, Matt Nagy, Greg Roman, Brian Callahan, all those veteran coaches they have on their staff, they seem to have gotten to him because he acknowledged that he has to be smarter about when he takes hits this year, which is probably a good idea to have if you're going in and playing against a guy like, I don't know, Azeez Al-Shaair. Might be a good idea. And just go ahead and just get down on the turf, hit the deck. Hit the deck, Jackson Dart. Thanks for watching the Believe in Texans podcast brought to you by FanDuel. Please like and subscribe on YouTube. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify or anywhere else, give us a 5-star review and leave some nice words. It helps a lot. It helps other Texans fans find the glory that is the Believe in Texans community. Thank you.